Hey game makers! Welcome to our first MZ plugin tutorial on this channel, and let me tell you, this one is quite the good. Quite the good. That's where my brain is now. Welcome to the MZPLUS PrimeParallax plugin tutorial, because I don't know alliteration, I guess. Essentially, this is a super diverse parallax plugin that has extended features like infinite fog, reflections, infinite fog, the ability to change the z-axis of any layer, infinite fog, setting images to specific tiles on the map, infinite fog, and more. Now the commands you can use and how they all work are listed both in the plugin help file and a separate PDF it comes with. So it'd be a good idea to take a look through those before we begin, as understanding how to use certain features might get a bit confusing if, say, this is your first RM and you want the plugin because ooh, shiny! Okay, let's start. First off, this requires the MZPLUS plugin too, so make sure to throw that in. You don't need to do anything with it, it's just there to look pretty and make things work. Second off, PrimeParallax's parameters. Since we're dealing with external images, you can set the folder location to where you'd like to store all of them. Default is Parallax Maps, but it can be changed to whatever suits you. Under that, you can choose to further organize them into subfolders. If on, as you can see in the help file, the images will be called from subfolders with their layer type as the file name. So you'd need a ground map folder, a light map folder, and so on. For now, we're keeping it off because being lazy and disorganized is win! Now for the fun stuff. Default auto layers is the next section. Here, you set all of the default parameters used when setting the layers up. These will be the settings used if calling a layer automagically, which, to my surprise, is totally a thing you can do. So let's click on that. Each layer has the same list of options to set. We can show if each individual layer is active by default with a true or false. Layer name refers to, you guessed it, the name of the layer image. This is used if you're, as I mentioned, calling an image to load automatically. The name entered, reflection map, for example, is used as part of the file name you'll need. Then you just tack on an underscore map ID at the end of the file name. So if we perhaps want map52 to load all of its resources by default, let's say a parallax, ground, and light layer, you'll want to set those images to be called ground map underscore 52, parallax map underscore 52, and light map underscore 52. Or change the file names to whatever you want here. You can also manually change out the layers to pretty much any image from any of the folders via plugin commands. But we'll get to that awesomeness later. Time for settings! Settings are great! Z-index. Let's talk about Z-layering for a second. Z-indexing here is referring to the order of stuff. Tiles, characters, parallaxes, animations, and so on, and how they are drawn on the screen. Now, script writing Echo thinks a visual representation of layering would be helpful, and I'm sure video editing Echo is going to be mad about it, but that's her problem, so let's go with it anyway. The way default MZ is set up, we've got layer 0 as the lower tiles, 1 as lower characters, 3 as normal characters, 4 as upper tiles, 5 as upper characters, 6 as the airship shadow, 7 balloons, 8 animations, and 9 destination whatever that means. The way this plugin works, by default anyway, is it draws the reflection layer at -3, the ground layer at -1, and the upper layers with decimal points, so 5.1 parallax, 5.2 shadow, and 5.6 light. These can all be changed by default, and on an as-needed basis, as can fogs. Blend mode applies the standard MZ blends to the layer. You've got normal, add, multiply, and screen. Blending just changes how the image displays with other images, as seen here. Add and screen are good for lights, and multiply works great for shadowy things. Opacity is the see-throughness of a layer. 255 for max imageness, and 0 for max see-throughness, and anything in between. Tint color is written as HTML color code, hex code, and if you want to tint it to anything that isn't the default that's listed, and you just for some reason don't have every color code memorized like a noob or something, I'd recommend Googling HTML color codes. I mean, there is literally a website called htmlcolorcodes.com. Offset X and Y are by default set to 0, and changing these will just push the image over the X and Y amount you enter. Now at the very bottom, you'll see this Nova lighting option. Yeah, ignore that. It's an external plugin I have no access to at this point in time, so we'll be ignoring that for this tutorial. From what I'm told, it's a compatibility thing that will do cool things, but it's not ready yet. So that's all for the default layers. Luckily, that's the bulk of the initial info dump, and the remaining parameters are a bit easier to process. Character reflections! Also, I love these too. On will enable you to show reflections on the characters. Off will turn it off. Complex! Default reflections set to on will display them by default. Reflection blur. This one doesn't even have a description, darn it! On for on, off for off! Quality sets the goodness of how the blur will look. So low, medium, high, and max. If your game starts lagging, you might want to turn down a setting. Otherwise, max it up. Character fade is just an effect that fades the reflection a bit. Again, just a simple on and off. Character opacity, again, changes the see-throughiness of the reflection. Now, keep in mind, outside of the toggle, the actual reflection blur settings cannot be changed outside of the parameters. Okay, now to my favorite part, you can set fog layer presets! Fog layers preset config. This will allow you to keep a list of preset fogs for easy access. So make them up, drop them in whenever you need them. It's great. And now we're going to skip this entirely. You heard me. The parameters you set here are the same ones used in the plugin commands, so we'll go over what's left of them there. Just know that you can preset them here so you can call them later from the plugin commands. And last but not least, for just the parameters, we can choose to disable MV's default auto shadows if they don't quite jive with the aesthetic of your game, and we can also choose to disable MZ's default parallax. This can be used if you're using a parallax image in the map editor as reference, but not actually wanting it to show up in-game. Keep in mind, however, this also blocks out the default MZPLUS command. However, realistically, you can use a lower layered fog to do the same effect as the MZParallax would anyway. And lastly, region interactions. This is a list in which you set the region IDs and what they do. This is incredibly cleverly set up, as you can set each individual interaction for a single region ID, which gets rid of any problem with not being able to layer region IDs, which is great. We set the region ID up top, so any of the default 1 to 255, we have passability options. We can choose to block out everything, making the region completely impassable, or have it set to just the player or event. Again, we can choose to allow those as well. Having bush on will set the bush flag and make the character in a bush, or rather in a half see-through bush effect. We can also alter the reflection properties for any of the above. Choose to disable it just for that region, or modify the opacity and offset. Offset would be good if, for example, you want the reflection to show up a bit away from the character. Like under a ridge, or under a bridge, or I can't think of anything else that rhymes, so let's cut that sentence and move on to the next. And that is all for the plugin parameters. This plugin is a beast! So let's take a quick break and do some plugin commands! And we're back! Was that enough of a break for you? To set up plugin commands, let's open an event on the map we want to parallaxify. Yeah. For these examples, we're going to be calling images manually, so we won't have any default auto layers set up for this. Keep in mind, however, if you do have defaults set, you can change them in the plugin commands. So, plugin commands! New to MZ, this is a super cool quick access plugin command selector. Let's click on the plugin name, Boxydoo, and select the PrimeParallax plugin. On the right, you'll see a list of commands that it comes with. We have toggle layers, which lets you toggle the layers by turning them on and off. Change layers, which lets you edit layers. Change fog, which lets you set and modify fogs. Reset layer, which I'll let you guess that one on your own. And reflection, which lets you modify some of the reflection parameters. Let's check out toggle layers. From the bottom up, we have a list of true and falses for each layer, so you can set whichever ones you want to show up. Now, if you have these set to true and you don't have defaults set up or don't set new ones, it'll yell at you, so make sure you have the ones you have images for set up. Now, the important part here, and for all of these settings, is the trigger type. We have page and event trigger. This will determine when the command will activate for the game. If set to page, it will run as soon as the event page is loaded. So if you have a blank event with just one of these commands set to trigger page, let's say on an action button, it will still trigger regardless of what the player does as long as the page is running. If you had the command on a second page under a self-switch A, for example, it won't run until that page is switched to, but will need no other prompt than just being there from that point on. Alternatively, if, for example, using the command during a cutscene event, you can set the trigger to event trigger, and it will just trigger the event in its normal sequence. So if you're in the middle of a cutscene and suddenly want 10 million fogs, event trigger will just play out the way you would expect it to. Now the one you'll probably spend more time with, change layer. Again, and for all of the rest of these, so I'm going to stop mentioning it, the event trigger type can be set up top. Parallax Layer will allow you to set the layer type. So the para, light, shadow, ground, and reflection layers. To save time, we'll just be going through one since all of the settings are the same for each. So let's do the aptly named Parallax Layer, cause why not? You can also set it to turn the single layer on and off instead of toggling all of them in the previous option. Now the settings. This is the same window from the fogs we skipped in the parameters. It has fog properties listed as well, but they don't apply for the non-fog layers I listed earlier. So we'll be ignoring them until we get to fogs. Got that? Great! Image lets us set the image, and actually you can select any image from any folder? What is this sorcery? You want to throw a random battle background on your map? Go right ahead! Wanna, I don't know, load your window skin image in? Sure, go for it! Now, if you're using subfolders, this is important, or any folder that isn't accessible via the list, you'll have to go into the text option and type it in manually. So for example, parallax maps/ground maps/ground map _999. After choosing the destination, you can hit the box to the right and select the image you want. So for this test, I just grabbed some maps from my game, Gaia's whatever over there. So we're gonna use those for this test. We've got a ground, parallax, light, shadow, and a reflection layer for it. Since we're exampling parallax here, we'll choose the para one from the parallax map folder. That leaves the fog options, which aren't applicable because this isn't a fog. And we're done. Now, infinite fog! Let's select change fog. Fog index refers to which fog it is. If you have 10 fogs showing, you'll want each fog to have a different number. It's helpful, so, if you want to use the following option to turn off the fog, you'll be turning off the right one. Now for settings. Fog change settings allow us to select whether we're changing the fog settings or setting a pre-entered setting from the parameters earlier. Jumping straight to the bottom, we can ignore all this nonsense and set the ID we would have set in the fog presets if we set any. We did not. So we'll set it to the fog settings and enter the fog settings. As we did with the paras, we have all the same options here. As we're not using a preset, these aren't preset. So we'll have to manually enter anything we want for the Z-index, blend, opacity, tint, or offsets. And so, we come to the awesomest part! Fog properties. Position type. It's neat. We can set it to screen, and the fog will behave as you'd expect an RM fog to behave, as a giant image all over the screen. Skipping the map-specific options for now, at the bottom we have tiling scale and scrolling. Scrolling X and Y will let you scroll the image in those directions, as set. Tiling scale is more interesting. It will let you modify the scale/size of the image being shown. Pretty standard fog settings, but then it gets super interesting. Let's jump back up to the position type and set it to map. This is perhaps the most confusing setting I came across before I realized how awesome it actually is. Setting the position to map will allow you to bind the image to the map, instead of acting as a screen-sized overlay. Map position X and Y are even cooler. These let you bind the image to a specific tile on the map. And then we can modify the width and height of the binded map image. The scrolling, resizable, infinite layered tile positioned map fog. Do you want supremely bad muffin water overlaying effects? How about water that moves in the direction you want it to? City billboards that can scroll? These were just the first few ideas that came to mind when I realized just the kind of things you could do with this kind of flexibility. Okay, that was my favorite part. I was excited. Haha, and that is the fogs. And to finish the plugin off, reset layer, which yada yada selects the layer to reset. Fogs though! The reflection, which lets us toggle, you know where this is going. And reflection, which lets us toggle if the reflection is showing on a certain character. Target lets you select self, so the event you're currently on, then player, follower, and event, which are self-explanatory. Below this is where you enter the setting for the applicable character you set. So which follower or the event ID, whether it's visible or not, and show throughiness, and any sort of Y offset if you need one. Again, for bridges and what have you. And that's all the settings! Jeez, that was a lot of settings! So yeah, that's the PrimeParallax plugin in a nutshell. Neat! I've been told from the developer that they've got more features planned for the future, so that's exciting too. This plugin is available for download at the link in the description. If you're looking for more MZ tutorials, I have all of this one at the moment, but any MV eventing tutorials I have up should pretty much all be applicable to MZ too. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later, gamers! Hey, game maker! Welcome to the Welcome to the MZ Here, you set all of the default rewards. Ground map, that's hard to say. You can also manually Z-index. Let's talk about and also on an as-needed and on an as-needed basis. And as an Okay, now my favorite part, you can use... you can set fog layer presets. So any of the default between 1 and 255. Let me just double check that it is actually 255. Yeah. We set the region ID up top, so any of the default 1 to 255. Wait, is it 1? Is it 0? It is 1. Having bush, we'll set the bush flag to make the character in a bush. Having bush on, we'll set the flag. Talking about having bush here, it's a little weird. And that is that for all the plugin parameters. And that is that for all the plugin parameters. The parameters is the word that is on the screen. And that is that. And that is all. That's what I have written. And that is all. Let's click on the plugin name, Boxy-Doo, and select the PrimeParallax plugin. Set up for set. What does this mean? This is what I wrote. It'll yell at you, so make sure you have the ones you have images set up for set. It makes sense, but it isn't written very well. So make sure you have the ones you have images set up for set. Why? Neighbors, come on, I'm trying to record! The neighbors are being loud! Oh no. Do you want supremely bad muffin water overlay? That sounds terrible. I've been told from the game makers